There was a time when his voice was inescapable. It filled arenas, his records sold in the millions, and his songs were anthems an entire generation knew by heart. From his humble working-class roots in Brooklyn to global superstardom, Neil Diamond became one of the 20th century's best-selling recording artists. He was an internationally renowned, dynamic touring performer and a skilled composer whose work generated countless hits for himself and for others. But as time went on, the spotlight dimmed. Today, for many, he is remembered for just one song, Sweet Caroline. However, Neil Diamond was so much more than that. He was a songwriter of immense talent, an artist who defined the pop sensibility of the 60s and 70s, and one of the most emotional lyricists of his generation. This is the strange case of Neil Diamond, a man who became a legend by accident, a poet who became a stadium act, and the elegant, melancholic, and often forgotten hero of pop. Do you know his story? If so, tell us in the comments what your favorite Neil Diamond song is, the one you can't help but sing along to every time you hear it. To truly understand Neil Diamond, you have to understand that he has always been two different people, fighting for control. First, there is the artist. This is the lonely kid from Brooklyn, the son of Polish Jewish immigrants. His childhood was not stable. It was defined by constant upheaval. The family moved frequently, and he later claimed to have attended 9 different schools, which made him a social outcast. This is the introspective poet who found his only companions on the radio, developing an early love for country music and early rock. This is the young man who saw folk legend Pete Seeger perform at a summer camp and was so moved by the power of a man with a single guitar that he immediately got his own and began writing songs. This is the brilliant, disciplined pre-med student on a fencing scholarship at NYU who couldn't stop the melodies in his head. This is the man who would later write I Am, I Said, a raw existential cry of a man lost between two shores. This is the artist. And then there is the showman. This is the sequined Las Vegas-style global superstar, the man who points at the crowd and 50,000 people roar ba ba ba. This is the pop music machine, the Jewish Elvis, who wrote some of the most explosively joyful, simple, and undeniable hits of all time. This is the man who would write Sweet Caroline. His entire career, his entire life, has been a brutal and beautiful war between these two identities, and it all started in a factory. In the early 1960s, the mythical Brill Building in New York City was the epicenter of the pop world. It was a song factory. This wasn't a place for introspective art. It was a creative boot camp where producers like Don Kirshner would lock kids in tiny windowless rooms with pianos and tell them not to come out until they had a 3-minute radio-ready hit for a new girl group or a teen idol. This is where Neil Diamond learned his trade, earning just $16 a week. He wasn't an artist. He was a mechanic. He was competing directly with other writers in the building, future legends like Carole King, Jerry Goffin, and Paul Simon. He learned the brutal, efficient craft of hit-making. He was a ghost in the machine. He had a few near misses under a pseudonym, like 10 Lonely Guys for Pat Boone. But in 1966, a brand new, made-for-TV band called the Monkees needed a hit. They got a song from this kid in the Brill Building. That song was I'm a Believer. By the time it was released, the group was a teen phenomenon, and the song had over 1 million pre-orders. It rocketed to #1 and stayed there for 7 weeks, becoming the biggest selling single of 1967. He also penned their next hit, A Little Bit Me, A Little Bit You. He was, without question, one of New York's most successful young writers. But Diamond didn't want to stay in the shadows. He felt his songs, even the pop hits, were too personal for others to interpret. He decided to strike out on his own. In 1966, he signed with Bang Records, a small label run by the legendary producer Burt Burns, the man who had written Twist and Shout. And this is where the war between the artist and the showman began. His debut single was Solitary Man. It was a dark, brooding, folk rock confession of loneliness. It was a modest hit. It was pure artist. But then he wrote Cherry Cherry. It was a burst of acoustic energy, a perfect, joyful pop song. It was a smash, hitting number 6. Suddenly, Bert Burns only wanted more Cherry Cherry. He saw Diamond as a pop singles machine, but Diamond saw himself as an artist. He wanted to record more ballads, more of the introspective material like Solitary Man. The label refused. This dispute over his contract and creative direction became bitter. Diamond felt trapped, unable to grow. When Burns died suddenly and tragically, Diamond was finally able to leave the label. He had won his freedom. In 1968, he moved to Los Angeles, signed with Uni Records, and the artist was finally set free. This is where his golden age began. His 1970 album, Taproot Manuscript, was a stunning display of ambition. On side 2, he featured the African Trilogy, a complex 3-part suite where he experimented with African percussion and choirs on the track Sulaimon. It was a risky intellectual move, anticipating the world music genre long before the term existed. This was the pre-med student, the lonely poet, making art. But the showman was still in him. The factory-trained hitmaker knew how to write a simple, perfect melody. In 1969, he released Sweet Caroline. Allegedly inspired by a photo of Caroline Kennedy, it was a masterpiece of pop construction. It was a massive commercial comeback, reaching number 4. Today, it's an anthem in stadiums, but at the time, it was just a perfectly crafted pop jewel. His 5th LP, Touching You, Touching Me, became his most successful work to date, hitting number 30 and going gold. His 1970 live album, Gold, recorded at the legendary Troubadour, was a smash. By the fall of 1970, he had graduated to the arena circuit. For a moment, the two Neils existed in perfect harmony. He proved it with his next single. It was his most personal, most artistic statement yet. I said. He reportedly worked for months on the lyrics, at one point even consulting a therapist because he couldn't get the words to express what he felt. The song, a raw cry of a man caught between two worlds, was perfectly in tune with the confessional singer-songwriter movement of the era. It was a massive hit, reaching number 4. He could be both. He could follow that existential cry with Song Sung Blue, a deceptively simple sing-along that became his second number 1 hit and earned him Grammy nominations for Record of the Year and Song of the Year. The artist and the showman were working together, but one of them was about to take over. In 1972, Neil Diamond recorded Hot August Night, a double live album at the Greek Theatre in Los Angeles. This album wasn't just a concert, it was a coronation. This was the moment the showman was born. This was the birth of the sequined, mystical, Jewish Elvis. It was a mix of mysticism, intensity, and a pure, unadulterated connection with the audience. He even used a quadraphonic sound system to create a full, immersive sound. The album was a monster, hitting number 5, going gold in a month, and staying on the charts for years. It is still considered one of the greatest live albums of all time. Hot August Night marked his ascent to true superstardom. The showman had taken the throne. After a 3-week run on Broadway in October, the artist was so burned out that Diamond retired from live performing. He wouldn't return for years. When he did, he leaned into the showman. He recorded a duet of You Don't Bring Me Flowers with his old high school classmate Barbra Streisand. It was pure, glossy pop. It was a number 1 hit, certified platinum. He collaborated with French songwriter Gilbert Bécaud on September Morn, another top 20 hit. And then, The Ultimate Gamble, The Jazz Singer, 1980. This was the climax of the showman's takeover. The movie was a critical disaster. Critics tore the film and his performance apart, with one famously saying he had the charisma of a kosher pickle. The artist was mocked and humiliated, but the showman had never been more powerful. The soundtrack was a phenomenon. It sold millions and gave him a string of massive radio hits: Love on the Rocks, Hello Again, and the soaring anthem, America. Here's a detail many fans don't know. When recording America, Diamond reportedly broke down in the vocal booth during one take, overwhelmed by the song's theme of immigration. a deeply personal subject for the son of immigrants. The emotion in his voice was real, and it's part of why the song resonated so powerfully. This was the great paradox of the 1980s. The critics dismissed him as cheesy, old-fashioned, and uncool. He was the king of adult contemporary, a label that music critics treated as a death sentence, but Diamond remained a powerhouse. While critics called him uncool, he was quietly one of the most successful musicians in the world. He remained a force on the concert circuit. His fans were intensely loyal. He wasn't a teen idol anymore. He was an artist for adults, a demographic that buys tickets and albums for life. In 1992, for example, he was the second highest grossing American concert act of the year. For 20 years, the showman reigned. He released a country album, Tennessee Moon, which hit number 3 on the country charts. He released the movie album, a 2-disc set of film song covers, which also went gold. He was a beloved, respected, but irrelevant icon. Then, in 2004, the artist woke up. He did the unexpected. He collaborated with legendary producer Rick Rubin for the acclaimed album 12 Songs. This is the producer famous for his American recordings with Johnny Cash, the king of stripping away the gloss to find the raw, beating heart of a song. Rubin didn't produce the showman. He produced the artist. He stripped away the sequins, the orchestra, and the echo. He sat Neil Diamond in a chair with just a guitar, just like the kid who saw Pete Seeger at that summer camp. And the result was a critical masterpiece. The critics who had called him cheesy for 2 decades were now calling him a genius. It was the ultimate vindication. The lonely kid from Brooklyn, the introspective poet, had been there all along, hiding in plain sight. Rubin later revealed that Diamond would sometimes arrive at the studio with a notebook filled with handwritten lyrics, crossed out lines, rewrites on rewrites. It was the proof. Beneath the spectacle, Diamond had always been a craftsman. In 2018, Neil Diamond announced his retirement from touring. He had been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. One of the last times he surprised audiences came in 2020, when he appeared unannounced at a Boston Red Sox game to lead the crowd in Sweet Caroline. His voice was weaker, but his timing was perfect, and he brought 35,000 people to their feet. It was a reminder, even when the body fades, the showman never fully dies. His story is that of an artist who never sought to be modern, but rather eternal. His legacy is secure. He was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2011. A Broadway musical, A Beautiful Noise, tells his story. Even after retiring, he released classic Diamonds, reinterpreting his catalogue with the London Symphony Orchestra. In the end, the war between the artist and the showman wasn't a war at all. It was a partnership. He was the lonely poet who could write, "I am, I said," and he was the glorious showman who could make 50,000 people feel joy. He turned his melancholy into art, and that art fills stadiums to this day.